Tonight, we will begin with a development predicted by Western intelligence agencies, prepared for by Ukrainian military planners, and desperately sought to avoid by Russian commanders. I want to talk about a defeat that occurred not in months of a slow and grueling war, but in just a few weeks. Weeks that shattered the narrative of Russian supremacy. Weeks that completely eliminated Putin's most significant territorial gains. Weeks that fundamentally altered the course of this conflict. What Russia accomplished today, I would say, was that it crossed a threshold that the Kremlin swore it would never cross. And when that threshold collapsed, Ukraine wasted no time. They acted with precision, speed, and devastating strategic consistency. In fact, the city of Kherson, the only regional capital Russia had managed to capture since launching this invasion, fell not through Russian advancement, but through retreat. Yes, Russia retreated. Russia was defeated. This defeat will lead to a harsh reckoning for Moscow, one that will reverberate through the corridors of power in the Kremlin for years to come. Weeks before, we had seen signs, not from official Kremlin statements or Russian state media, but simply that Russian military units were orchestrating something unprecedented. Now, Russia certainly displayed aggression. But its aggression was methodical. Its maneuvers followed a certain logic, a discernible pattern, almost a strategic doctrine. But what caused serious concern in Washington and Kyiv this fall was the silence of this pattern. Military intelligence experts who tracked the deployment of Russian forces recognized the signs, the removal of command structures from the front lines, the evacuation of administrative personnel from occupied territory, the irregular movement of heavy military equipment across the Dnipro River, the sudden removal of Russian propaganda materials from public spaces in Kherson. All of this was shrouded in darkness. And whenever Russia experiences something like this, it signals to us that something is about to be revealed. In fact, in the months leading up to the situation, Ukrainian forces had systematically dismantled the logistical infrastructure that had enabled the Russian occupation of Kherson. HIMARS precision strike systems supplied by the United States had rendered every bridge, every ammunition depot, every supply corridor a usable target. The Antonovsky Bridge, previously the main artery for Russian reinforcement operations, had been rendered militarily inoperable. The Kakhovka Dam crossing had been damaged beyond any reliable military function. Russia was being systematically choked. And the commanders in Moscow understood this fact. The question was never whether Russia could hold Kherson indefinitely. The question was always how long they would maintain this illusion before circumstances forced them to accept reality. Early yesterday, satellite reconnaissance officially confirmed the withdrawal of armored units and artillery batteries that had been under occupation for more than 8 months, an operation intelligence experts have described as a significant retreat. These represent categories of military assets that Russia only withdraws when it signals something extremely specific. Let me explain: tactical repositioning, strategic redeployment, or complete defeat. Some Western analysts couldn't precisely determine which category this operation belonged to, or if it encompassed all three simultaneously. However, what they understood was that Russia had fundamentally changed its military posture. And when a nuclear-armed superpower changes its posture without explanation, even gradually the entire international community notices. General Sergei Surovikin, the newly appointed commander of Russian forces operating in Ukraine, was given an impossible task: to secure control over a logistically unsustainable territory while simultaneously maintaining an image of strength to domestic public opinion. His speech on a television program broadcast on Russian state media a few days ago, in which he discussed the difficult elections ahead, was the clearest indication yet that the Kremlin has acknowledged something it can never publicly admit: retreat. The precise terminology that Putin declared would never be associated with his special military operation was being etched onto the maps of southern Ukraine with the withdrawal of Russian troops. The statement released tonight by the Ukrainian military leadership was far from ordinary. It wasn't procedural, that wasn't hard to understand, it wasn't merely symbolic, it carried the weight of victory. Many officials, many briefings, many press conferences described Russia's withdrawal as disorderly, chaotic, and perhaps, most importantly, irreversible, but withdrawals are only successful if the pursuing force shows hesitation. Ukraine showed no hesitation. In fact, today's advances were among the fastest and most synchronized operations we have witnessed throughout this conflict. Here's a summary of what we understand. Hours after the confirmation of Russia's withdrawal, Ukrainian forces entered the outskirts of Kherson. These weren't the cautious reconnaissance movements we observed in previous weeks. These were fully mechanized units, armored vehicles, and infantry battalions that Ukraine used only as it prepared to liberate and permanently secure its territories. Ukraine's blue and yellow flag now flies over Kherson's main square. Civilians, freed from months of occupation, fear, and uncertainty, poured into the streets to welcome their liberators. The images transmitted globally tonight show that this goes beyond mere military success. Tonight, Ukrainian military officials confirmed that their forces have taken control of the city of Kherson and the adjacent areas along the western bank of the Dnipro River. These areas included vital infrastructure points recently abandoned by Russian forces, which experts interpret as a frantic effort to avoid a full-scale encirclement. Ukraine advanced before Russia systematically destroyed everything of value. They secured port infrastructure. They secured government facilities. They secured the communication networks that Russia used to coordinate its occupation operation. Ukraine saw that Russia targeted not just the geography, but the entire framework of the occupation, infrastructure that Russia could potentially use to return. This underscores why Western support was so crucial. Russia's position in Kherson had strategic weight. It wasn't merely symbolic. It represented the corridor to Crimea, the basis for the southern invasion, concrete proof of Putin's annexation. And Ukraine, fully understanding this, responded with military force. Not recklessly or impulsively, but with strategic calculation. They didn't plunge recklessly into urban warfare that would have resulted in countless casualties. They didn't give Russian forces the opportunity to reorganize and establish new lines of defense. They targeted the supply networks that made the invasion possible. They attacked the command infrastructure that synchronized Russian military operation. And when the time came, they advanced with a discipline and speed that military academies will analyze for generations to come. And this is where the narrative gains even greater significance. Western intelligence experts believe that Russia's decision to withdraw from Kherson was orchestrated to assess the integrity of the Ukrainian command after months of grueling counteroffensive operation. Russia sought to determine whether Ukraine would overstep its bounds, whether it would make mistakes in the euphoria of victory. But the opposite happened. Ukraine did not fall into an ambush or respond to tactical deception. They made such a methodical, disciplined advance that even Russian military commentators acknowledged it. It's not easy to attract Russia's attention. But today, Ukraine achieved exactly that. Military strategists who communicated anonymously with international journalists described Russia's withdrawal as a controlled collapse, an approach of abandoning untenable positions while preserving forces for subsequent operations. But Ukraine today demonstrated both capability and determination. Their advance was not only rapid, but also so precisely coordinated that Russian rearguard units found themselves isolated before they could complete their withdrawal. This factor is important because it demonstrates that Ukrainian intelligence has infiltrated Russian operational planning. It reveals that Ukraine is not merely reacting to Russian initiatives. They are anticipating them. They are defining the conditions of the battlefield. They are gaining the upper hand against them. As intelligence continued to pour in throughout the day, we learned additional details about the scale of Ukraine's liberation operation. Ground forces have reclaimed over 2,000 square kilometers, forcing Russian troops to abandon equipment that could not be removed in time. Special operations targeted communication infrastructure, which has been crucial to Russian command and control in recent months. Artillery units operating along the Dnipro reportedly destroyed pontoon crossing points used by Russia to evacuate personnel and supplies. This was not merely a tactical success and a symbolic turning point. It represented a strategic shift. It constituted a fundamental change in the momentum of the war. And momentum is the only element that Russia has struggled to maintain since its failed offensive on Kyiv last February. For every piece of territory Russia gained in the brutal conflict in Donbass, Ukraine responded with actions that fundamentally readjusted the strategic equation. The Kharkiv counteroffensive in September shocked the international community. Today's liberation of Kherson confirms this pattern, and Russia feels the effects of defeat. Remember the context. Russia thought this war would end in days, not months. They predicted it would collapse under the force of the initial offensives of the Ukrainian resistance. They anticipated the crumbling of Western solidarity, a reduction in economic sanctions, and a decrease in international support. They believed Kherson would be the first of many regional capitals to fall permanently under Russian authority. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. Ukrainian resistance has grown stronger each month. The Western Bloc has transformed into an unparalleled alliance of support. And Kherson, the most valuable achievement of Russia's southern offensive, has been snatched from their control. Just weeks ago, standing in the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin declared the permanent incorporation of Kherson Oblast into Russia. He referred to historical precedents, an obvious fate, and the irreversible determination of the Russian nation. Tonight, that declaration lies shattered beside the abandoned Russian fortifications on the west bank of the Dnieper. History will record this moment not as Russian expansion, but as Russian humiliation. What made this moment so important and at the same time so dangerous was that Russia's defeat in Kherson occurred at a time when Vladimir Putin was facing unprecedented domestic pressures. Military commanders were requesting resources that were not available. Economic advisors were asking for exemptions from sanctions that showed no sign of easing. Ordinary Russian citizens wanted their sons and husbands to return home safe and sound. Putin is trying to balance these inconsistent demands as he watches his army suffer successive defeats on the battlefield. And when leaders in this position make sudden maneuvers, they are not acting from positions of power. They are acting out of pressure. They are acting out of desperation. They are afraid of the consequences. The loss of Kherson represents not only a military setback for Putin, but also a political crisis. It represents an existential challenge to the narrative of inevitable Russian victory that sustained domestic support for this military operation. Tonight, that narrative has been shattered. The White House statement currently being distributed to allies and partners in the international community is designed to signal that the United States will not allow Russia to escalate its defeat. Officials have explicitly stated that Russia's behavior throughout this conflict is fundamentally inconsistent with the principles governing the international order. This is diplomatic language that implies Russia has violated every norm of civilized international conduct and will be held accountable. You don't usually hear this tone from American officials unless the situation is extremely serious. But the situation is extremely serious, right? That's why American officials are using this tone. The liberation of Kherson proves that Russian aggression can be defeated. It proves that occupied territories can be reclaimed. It proves that the sacrifices made by Ukraine and its international partners carry significant weight. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg supported this assessment, praising Ukraine's courage and warning that the coming winter months will test the alliance's collective resolve. But it seems that resolve is the only resource the democratic world has in abundance. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy delivered a powerful and emotionally charged speech to his nation this evening. Zelenskyy began this speech, which resonated widely around the world, by saying, "Kherson is returning to Ukraine. Our people are returning home." He added, "We remember all those who gave their lives for this victory. Their sacrifice will never be forgotten." Then he emphasized, "This is not an end. This is a step towards the complete liberation of all Ukrainian territory." These are the words of a war leader who fully understands how high the stakes are. Zelensky's speech was broadcast not only to Ukrainians, but to the entire world. He sent a message to allies. Your support is important and yielding results. He sent a message to enemies. We will not stop until every occupied city is liberated. He sent a message to history. Ukraine will not be erased from existence. This is what makes the current situation even more strategically worrying. Russia's defeat in Kherson did not happen in isolation. Simultaneously with the withdrawal from the regional capital, Russian forces also abandoned defensive positions spanning 100 kilometers. Wagner Group mercenaries suffered heavy losses in renewed offensive operations against Bakhmut. Russian naval forces in the Black Sea intensified provocative maneuvers near Ukrainian grain supply corridors. All these developments occurred within the same three-day period. Russia's simultaneous losses on multiple fronts suggest that something larger is unfolding beneath the surface. The question analysts are currently facing is whether Putin will accept this defeat and pursue a diplomatic exit strategy, or whether he will escalate tensions in a desperate attempt to reverse his worsening fortunes. Historical precedent points to the latter. Putin has never accepted responsibility for strategic failures. He has consistently sought to deflect blame, escalate tensions rather than negotiate, and destroy diplomatic solutions rather than build them. Tonight, the international novelty is watching to determine which path he will choose. Military analysts are currently examining various possibilities in the unfolding events. One scenario is that Russia prepares to establish new defensive lines along the eastern bank of the Dnipro and consolidate its forces for a prolonged defensive operation that will last through the winter months. Another scenario is that Russia attempts to withdraw its forces from Kherson to strengthen its attritional offensive operations in Donbas, trading off territorial control to concentrate combat power in priority sectors. And this is the one that concerns officials the most, that Russia is preparing to escalate tensions in unusual ways, whether through extended attacks on civilian infrastructure, intensified nuclear rhetoric designed to deter Western support provocations, specifically designed to draw NATO into direct military conflict. But today, Ukraine has completely seized the initiative. They did not wait for Russian reinforcements. They did not allow time for consolidation of power. They did not give Putin the opportunity to reframe defeat as a strategic repositioning. They liberated their cities. They reclaimed their sovereign territory. They won. What we are witnessing now is a multifaceted test of results. Russia is trying to determine whether Western support will diminish as winter conditions worsen, and Europe is trying to prevent energy shortages from shattering alliance unity. These opposing pressures will fundamentally shape the next phase. However, tonight, we can say that the balance has definitively shifted. Ukraine has proven to everyone that occupied territories can be liberated through military means. Russia has proven that it can be defeated on the battlefield. And the international community has also proven that armed aggression will not go unanswered. Tonight, we received reports from military sources monitoring the movements of Russian forces east of the Dnipro River. They indicate that Russian forces are establishing defensive positions, signifying preparation for a long-term presence. They report a reorganization of command structures following the chaos and confusion of the withdrawal operation, and even assess that Russia's decision to leave Kherson is part of a broader strategic recalculation aimed at preserving its remaining combat strength for future military operations. But Ukraine is not resting on celebrating this victory. In fact, Ukrainian forces are already planning the next operational phase. The success they achieved today was accomplished swiftly, coordinately, and overwhelmingly, sending a message to Russia that this war will not end on Moscow's preferred term. And it sent a message to the world that democracy can defeat autocracy in direct confrontation. The fact remains that courage can overcome brutality and that freedom is worth fighting for, whatever the cost. We expect more detailed information to emerge in the coming days about exactly what Russia hopes to achieve by invading Kherson. But what we understand for certain is that Ukraine's counteroffensive was carried out with masterful precision. It liberated hundreds of thousands of citizens from occupation. It reclaimed strategically vital territory, and it showed the international community that there are clear limitations to Russian military power. What happens next will fundamentally depend on Putin's decision in the coming week. If he accepts defeat and reaches a solution through negotiation, this moment will be remembered as the decisive turning point of the war. If he escalates further through conventional or unconventional means, Ukraine and its international partners have already shown that they are ready to respond proportionally. They have shown that they will not retreat under pressure. And tonight, for the first time in months, Russia seems truly uncertain about its next move. The Kremlin is silent, unusually silent. When Russia is silent like this, it means they are calculating their options. It means they are choosing their next move with extraordinary care. Because tonight Russia learned something it should have understood from the beginning of this conflict. Ukraine will not relinquish its sovereignty. The West will not abandon its democratic allies. And armed aggression will always ultimately pay the price. One thing became very clear tonight: Kherson is liberated, Ukraine is winning, and Russia, despite all its bravado and brutality, continues to lose this war. The blue and yellow flag waves over a liberated city tonight, and we will continue to follow every development as the next phase of this historic struggle unfolds. Stay tuned to stay informed about the agenda.